Greetings sailors, and welcome to the first of my German battleship gameplay videos. I'm going to split these up into three as I usually do, so this is going to be tiers 3 to 5, then it'll be tiers 6 to 8, and then tier 9 and 10 will have their own video. So we're going to start off at the very beginning because I've heard it's a very good place to start. This is the tier 3, the Nassau, or possibly Nassau. Somebody did post a pronunciation guide somewhere that I caught sight of, and most of the names I can remember, but not this one. It's kind of odd in that Wargaming have clearly made a mistake. They forgot to make it not fun, because it is actually by far the most fun of the tier 3 battleships to play, and I think in part it's down to this funky turret arrangement, but it's also the guns. The guns are actually worth using AP shells with, and that's kind of odd because it's got the smallest caliber. Now before we get to the guns, I'll go down the stats in order, and I'll just do my usual thing. So it's got 35,400 hit points, which is head of the South Carolina but behind the Kaiser, and that's fairly usual across the lines. The Japanese battleships usually have the most, with the Americans usually having the least. It's got 13% torpedo damage mitigation, which is the same as the Kaiser, so it's not particularly good, but this is basically a dreadnought. Armour is the worst at tier 3 with a maximum of 270 on the belt armour. The South Carolina and the Kaiser both have 305mm, but still it felt reasonably tough. At this tier, people are much more going to be spamming HE at you anyway, including other battleships, so you don't really have to worry about that lower armour value too much. Now, onto the guns. They are 11-inch guns, the same as the Scharnhorst has even. And I don't think they're exactly the same kind of guns as the Scharnhorst, but down here at tier 3, the fact that they're 11 inches doesn't matter quite so much. As you've seen, I've already had some quite nice salvos on this South Carolina. You've got this rather funky turret arrangement that basically makes this the St. Louis of battleships. You can angle out actually, and even if you've got somebody dead bow on towards you and you've fired those 3 front turrets, or the 3 turrets that can point forwards, you can then angle out the sides and you can get those aft side turrets to fire as well. So you just have quite a nice amount of firepower available even if you're bow on towards somebody. And when you're broadside, you've got a very nice arrangement of turrets indeed. The reload is 22 seconds, and this is one of the reasons I think why it feels a lot more fun than the other two, because they both have a much more standard 30-second reload. So you can just get the shells out a lot quicker, and because it's a German battleship, they're also reasonably fast shells, although not actually the fastest at tier 3. That's actually the Kaiser. I'm getting ahead of myself there though. Turret turn time is the worst with 51.5 seconds, which is not that far behind the other two, which have Kaiser has 45 seconds, 40 seconds rather. South Carolina's got 45. Range is 10.1 kilometers, which is behind the South Carolina but ahead of the Kaiser. And the dispersion is actually, I think, somewhere in between the two. The South Carolina might actually have worse dispersion, but it's the rate of fire really that makes it feel not that bad. The secondaries, as you can see by the way, are rather decent as well. That was fun. You don't get to do that very often in a battleship. AP shells do 7,200 damage. HE is 3,200. It's the least because these are the smallest guns. Fire chance, however, is about the same as South Carolina. It's got 19% versus 20. The Kaiser has rather respectable 29, so that's going to be better for setting fires. But honestly, with this, I mean, some of the received wisdom for the other two is, you know, use HE a lot because the AP is generally terrible. But in this, you can use the AP very reliably. The AP velocity and the HE velocity are identical, so that's quite nice. You don't have to adjust your aim too much. Although having said that, velocity and the arc aren't always the same. I mean, the York is a prime example of that, where they have the same initial velocity, but the arcs are very different. But in this case, yeah, it is not quite as fast as the Kaiser shells, but it's still not bad. The array of secondaries is rather good. It's got 16 88mm mounts and 12 150mm mounts. So if you get close enough, and close enough in this case means 4 kilometers, as a base range of course, if you get a AFT captain, in that you can make that even better. It can be quite deadly to destroyers that get close enough, and some of the destroyers at this tier have to get that close. But the problem is, if they've gotten that close, unless they're low health, you're probably in trouble anyway, and this guy's definitely close enough to drop torpedoes. So I'm doing a bit of manoeuvring here, and you can actually see the guns opening up. But as with a lot of the battleships, most of these secondaries are broadside, so if you can make a pass like I made at that Chester, it's fine, but otherwise you might be in trouble. Now, he dropped his torpedoes earlier than I expected, but I only took the one, so that was alright. And that brings me rather nicely onto the speed. So 20 knots, which is exactly the same as the Kavachi. Turn radius of 510 meters, which is in between the two. It's not as bad as the Kavachi, but it's not as good as the South Carolina by 30 meters. The rudder shift, however, well, again in the middle, but still 11.2 is pretty respectable. The South Carolina's got 14.9, whereas the Kavachi has 10.7. So it's a nice combination. You don't have like the best of anything when it comes to mobility, but it doesn't really suffer in any regard compared to the rest. Lastly, the detection ranges, 10.4 kilometers surface detection. If you were nuts and had a concealment expert captain and camo on it, you could get it down to 8.6. If you were seal clubbing in this, I suppose, and it might be one of those ships that turns into a seal clubber's delight, I don't know, but my gut instinct says that that is very possible given just the nature of these guns. And, oh, hello, more torpedoes. Well, it's fine, I'll survive that. Air detection, well, that hardly matters at this tier. You might bump into tier 4 carriers, of course, but yeah, 8.3 kilometers. And talking of air, actually, this is one that does have, in theory, some anti-aircraft. It's got a grand rating of 7 with a DPS of 7, which is actually the same as the, almost the same as the Kavachi. In fact, the Kavachi's also got a guy on the deck that's standing there shooting his pistol in the air. So, all in all, it's quite fun, and I think it's mostly down to the reload and the turret arrangement. In other regards, it's not particularly remarkable, but, you know, having said it's not particularly remarkable, that just means it doesn't suffer in any one particular regard either. So, we're nearly done with this. I was trying to get this last kill, but I can't remember if I actually do or not now. I don't think I do. I think somebody else gets it. But I had, in theory, gotten a Kraken in this one already. It's just, this being a preview ship, I, alas, did not get the actual Kraken award. So, 56,000 damage is probably... I don't know, it's been so long since I've played the Tier 3 battleships, but it's probably respectable. Probably. I hope so. It was a fun game anyway, just that moment with being up close and personal with that Chester and all of the broadside secondaries opening up at him. Because normally in that kind of situation you're worried somebody's going to ram you, but we just went past each other, and of course I didn't have torpedoes to worry about there either, so yeah, that was fun. I wish I could do stuff like that more often. So at Tier 4, which is the one coming up next obviously, just as soon as this score screen goes away, we come to the Kaiser. And there's actually a fair few more ships to compare it to, because Tier 3, it's obviously just the regular, the Japanese and the American battleships to compare it to. But at Tier 4, we've suddenly got the regular lines plus a bunch of premiums. I'll mostly stick to comparing it to the regular ones, but I might throw in the stats of some of the premiums as well. So again, we're going to start with hit points. Fairly average hit points here with 46,400. Ahead of the Americans, the Wyoming gets 43,800. Myogi gets actually less, 45,700. That doesn't quite fit in with the rest of the line, and the Ishizushi is exactly the same. So that actually makes this best at Tier 4 rather. I probably should have paid more attention to these when I was putting them in the spreadsheet, but you get kind of into a zombie mode when you're just putting lots and lots of numbers into a spreadsheet. You stop thinking about the actual numbers you're putting in. So yeah, it actually has the most health, which is not bad. It's also got not quite the best torpedo protection, but 24% at Tier 4 is not bad. The Myogi gets 34%, everybody else is less than 20. So it's not great. I mean, 24% is not great by anyone's standards, but you're doing better than most everyone else. In terms of actual armour value though, this is pretty tough. This is by far the best armoured tier 4 battleship there is, you get up to 350 mil of belt armor. So with a bit of angling, you're going to bounce a fair few shells. But again, at tier 4, this is still the realm of a lot of HE spammers. However, with the tier 4 battleships, you start to see people might be firing more AP shells with those, so the angling will be useful. The guns are, again, well, I was going to say again they're of small caliber, but actually no, everybody at tier 4 has 12-inch guns. Wow, I'm doing this kind of late, so I might be correcting myself with some of these stats a bit, but anyway, yeah, so 12-inch guns, 305mm, you've got 10 of them in twin turrets, and again it's a rather funky turret arrangement. You've got the two midships turrets. They can, in fact, point like all on one side. It's just one of those midships turrets, whichever way you're pointing, will always take a long time to get there, and it will have a rather restricted arc, as you can see there. The turret can point in that direction, it just can't fire because there's bits of ship in the way. But it is possible to get a full broadside with this, unlike the Nassau. 26-second reload, which puts you just behind the Ishizushi. That's got the best at this tier with 25 seconds. Everyone else is pretty much 30 seconds, apart from the Imperator Nikolai, which has 36. However, of course, the Imperator Nikolai is known for being OP in other areas, so you don't have to worry too much about not having the rate of fire. Turret turn time is flat on 60 seconds base for 180 degrees, which is actually the worst at this tier. And you can improve that with Expert Marksman. You can get it down to about 48 seconds. It's definitely recommended. But yeah, it does feel a little bit like it's one of these ships where you do have to plan your which way you want your turrets to be facing reasonably carefully. The range is 14.6 kilometers, which is pretty decent. I said in my preview video that a lot of them, like the ranges are a bit inconsistent, but the ranges generally are sort of second or third best for their tier generally. And that holds true here. It's got less than the Miyogi, which has a fairly comfortable 18 kilometers, but the Wyoming is actually not that far behind the Kaiser. It's got 14.1 to the Kaiser's 14.6. And then you look at the Imperator, that's got 14.1. Let's see, the Arkansas Beta's got a base of 12.1, and the Ishizushi's got 12.9. You can get the Arkansas Beta to be about the same as the Wyoming, but you need the plotting room mod for that. And it is the only tier 4 that can get a plotting room mod, because of course it has basically all of the upgrade slots available. That's the gimmick of the Arkansas Beta if you don't have one. AP shells are actually slightly ahead of the pack in some regards. A lot of these 12-inch gunned ships have 8,300 or less. The Ishizushi has 8,000, but it's not the best by any means. The Miyogi's got 10,000 and the Nikolai's got 8,600, so it's somewhere in the middle, but it's still, you know, 8,400 is still reasonably hard hitting. HE 3,500, by far the worst. This is where that rather lackluster German HE starts to really become noticeable. Fire chance, however, you're still on a par pretty much with the Americans at 23%, exactly the same as the Wyoming. The Arkansas Beta is actually slightly worse at 22, the Miyogi's got 25, Ishizushi's got 32, and the Imperator has 33%, which is pretty damn good actually. I hadn't realised it was that good on that ship. Shell velocity, not the best at its tier, but still pretty respectable at 850 meters a second for the AP and the HE. The Wyoming gets 884, which is that's pretty nice. The Miyogi, on the other hand, is lagging rather behind at 790. So it's somewhere in the middle. The shell velocity is another one of those stats where generally the shell velocities on these ships is pretty good, but it's not always best in tier. Oh, that's a nice, there we go. That was a very, very nice target indeed. Double Citadel on that Kuma. Secondaries, again, a fairly good spread. You've got 4 double 88mm turrets and then 14 single 150mm mounts. Most of those are casement mounts in the actual side of the hull, as with the Nassau or Nassau. I'm going to do that throughout the video, aren't I? I'm going to just get my pronunciations, like, it'll be partly right and partly wrong, just to confuse people. But yeah, it's still a very good spread of secondaries. You've actually got slightly better range than the tier 3 as well, 4.5 kilometers, and everybody else has got 3.5. So again, this is where the flavour of the Germans with having good secondaries starts to kick into gear. It's not just the spread of secondaries that you've got, it's the range. The range on the secondaries is generally pretty good as well. In this case, you get a clear kilometre over everybody else. So you get an AFT captain on this, and you could give some nasty surprises to people, potentially. I mean, oh, pardon me, not that nasty, because obviously it's still, you know, there's still secondary guns with secondary gun accuracy, but you'd rather have it than not have it, and it can catch people unawares. It can, in fact, panic people just when they see a cloud of secondary fire coming towards them. The AA rating is actually okay for a tier 4. I almost said tier 7 there. It's not a tier 7. For a tier 4. Not as good as the Wyoming, which has a rating of 25 with a maximum DPS of 111. But this actually has a rating of 27 because it's got slightly better range. Those 88mm guns, I think, count as dual purpose guns. So I think those are the ones that have the 4 kilometre range, and the rest are 3.5 kilometres or below. Whereas the Wyoming, some of its DPS is in some 1.2 kilometre, like very short range guns. So they're actually probably reasonably on a par. And I haven't done the number crunching, but if you look at the actual, like the AA envelopes of these things, it might be that this actually edges out ahead, but either way, it's pretty decent AA for tier 4. It's not terrible at all. Speed-wise, you are a little faster than the previous tiers. You've got 23 knots with a turn radius of 600. In speed, you're better than either of the American battleships and the Imperator Nikolai, but the 2 Japanese ships will metaphorically run rings around you. They might actually be much wider rings though, because they both have much wider turn radiuses. 600 meters is not bad at all. It's only just behind what the Wyoming and the Arkansas Beta get. It's also got a rudder shift of 13 seconds, and again, that's kind of middle of the pack. It's not quite as good as the Americans, but it's not as good, not as bad as the Japanese in this case. The Miyogi's got 15.3 rudder shift. So it's pretty decent. It really is pretty decent. Surface detection is slightly over that of the Wyoming. It's got 14.2 kilometre surface detection range. The Wyoming is 14 kilometres. With all the skills and the camo, you can get that to 11.8. And that's all right, but I don't know, having a concealment expert, I mean, I throw in these numbers because, you know, I've got the numbers in the spreadsheet and why not, but having a concealment expert captain in this kind of tier is probably unlikely for most people, outside of those that are retraining their captains from other higher tier ships with more skills to the lower tiers, which I've seen people do. I should know, actually, and I probably should have said this in the first replay, the captain I'm using in this is my Tirpitz captain. One of the advantages of the way Wargaming did it this time, it wasn't perfect the way they gave us these ships, but it was better than previous times when we've had preview ships. We at least got to use our own captains even on the regular ships. So I was able to put my Tirpitz captain in these ships, and my Tirpitz captain has got basic firing training, advanced firing training, and has also got the manual focus anti-aircraft skill. So with the German battleships in particular, that manual AA skill comes in really useful, because the long-range DPS guns that you have tend to be ones that the manual AA skill really benefits. So that's a skill you should definitely consider on your German battleships overall. So, this game, I mean, I can actually talk about it now. This was a longer game, so I've managed to get through the stats, and we still have a couple of minutes of this left. I've done a respectable amount of damage so far, I think. 62,000 is not to be sniffed at, although it's not, like, super great. I'm not going to win any awards with that, but we've still got work left to do if we're going to win this. Now, I'm with the sort of greatest group of my remaining allies. There's a battleship just north of me, and that cruiser just to the south, and then there's what is that, a Tenryu that's further south still, and then we've got a cruiser that's much further south and is probably getting the focus of the enemies that are in the cap right now. However, we've just taken one of them out, and the other's very low health. Oh yeah, you can see there, that's what a Karlsruhe, can't quite tell. I'm doing this in the when I do these, I have to have the spreadsheet stuff on the second monitor, so I have to do all this in the little preview pane rather than having it previewed on my second monitor. So it makes life a bit more awkward when you're trying to read stuff and it's all smooshed up in the preview pane. But anyway, whatever cruiser that is, he actually has managed even to survive. So that just leaves a Myogi and whatever destroyer that is. I think it's a Wakatake. Can't remember. We'll see in a moment. Anyway, he will pop up again. We actually came sort of close to losing this one at various points. I mean, this is a zone game. You only get zone at low tiers these days. And it was looking kind of dicey-ish. I don't think we were ever in serious danger of actually, like, imminently losing it at any point. But there were stages where the enemy was starting to get a fair few cap points accumulated. And the only way to, if I remember correctly, the only way to reset cap points in zone is to actually kill the ships that are capping, but I might be wrong about that. It's just because you only get it at the low tiers, and I don't tend to play a lot of tier 3 and tier 4 ships or lower these days. I'm a bit fuzzy on what the game rules are for this particular mode now, because it just generally doesn't apply to most of the games I play. And Isakaze, there we go, not a Wakatake, it was the Isakaze. So I know that's a ship to be wary of. He's got a fairly quick reload. His torpedo spread is very tight. And if he's a competent player, he can be very dangerous indeed. Now, fortunately, the Phoenix, I think he slammed on the brakes there, and he might have even turned inwards a bit, which also helps kill your speed. So he just avoided taking a torpedo, and as for the Isakaze, he looks like he's just about done. There we go. So that just leaves this Myogi. So we're very firmly won at this point. This is... like this, I don't know how we'd lose this. We'd all have to start team killing each other. Sometimes I say these things and then it's like, well, actually no, that's incredibly obvious. Why did I just say that? But you get into the habit of just letting the mouth run. Sometimes it's like, oh, there's a bit of a gap here. Let's just let the mouth run and see what words come out. But sometimes it just results in nonsense. Anyway. So fairly close range. The secondaries are all opening up, and I'm just trying to get the rest of my guns round so I can maybe get some more shots into the hull. He's starting to wangle a bit at this point, but I still do get some pens. However, these being 12-inch guns, they don't have the best penetration. So even a bit of angling is going to mean bounces. But anyway, he gets torpedoed, and that's that. 86,000 damage, and not a bad game overall. I actually rebought the Myogi out of curiosity not long ago, because it's been a long time since I played that, and I liked it when I was grinding through it the first time, but I'm just... sometimes it's like, will the nostalgia hold up? You know, will the player that I am now know better than the player that I was then? Because I do have the Ishizushi and the Imperator Nikolai at tier 4 also, and I very occasionally take them out, but those are more kind of... well, one's a troll boat and the other's a lol boat, and so I wanted a serious tier 4 battleship to play, but... maybe I should have just stuck with taking out my Arkansas Beta instead. Although the speed of that can be a bit frustrating sometimes. And it's funny, 20.5 knots for the Americans and then 23 knots for this. It doesn't, like, it's not a big difference, but it does make a difference, even though it's not a big, like, gap particularly. So, lastly for this video, we come to the Tier 5, the König, and this is a Tier 7 game, so it's not ideal. I think this is, in fact, the very first game I played in this. Now, it's not the best damage game I had in it. There was another match where I ended up with something like 110 or 120k damage, but I decided to use this one instead, because that other one was a bit of a one-sided romp in some ways, although it ended up being quite a close game. But this was just, I don't know, this is one of those games where it's like I didn't really know what to expect because it's the very first match in it, and it just somehow worked out, and I do get quite lucky at times. Now that's a bit of early, I was getting a bit worried there, but that carrier was in fact going for the battleship behind me, so that's fine. And my AA wasn't really doing that much to this guy. It's pretty decent though, but we'll get to AA, So, hit points. It is actually last place. You've gone from being first place at tier 4 to last place at tier 5, 47,100. The New York and the Texas both have 49,000, just over, and the Congo has 54,000. Torpedo protection, still last place, 22%. With tier 5 and 6, it's particularly noticeable that these are, and I said this in the kind of overview video, these are World War I era battleships that never had the kind of post-war modernizations that ships like the Congo and the New York had. So it does show, particularly with the torpedo bulge protection. Armour-wise, you're actually still the best. 19mm at the weakest to 350mm on the belt armour. Everyone else is working with 305mm, or in the case of the Congo, 203mm, which is like, well, the Congo is a battle cruiser really, so it's not it's not the same kind of ship. But of course, the Congo is a much faster ship. That was a nice salvo, by the way. Rather lucky, but still. A good first salvo against that cruiser. Now, the bad news, and I think this is one of the main reasons why Jingles, I haven't watched his, like, if he's put any videos out on these ships today, I haven't watched them yet, but I know from the Skype chat channel that a lot of the contributors share that he didn't like this ship in particular, and he's actually intimated in one of the I did watch his, like, the video where he did the kind of the cinematic stuff, and he said, well, there's one of the ships I particularly don't like, and I actually couldn't figure out if it was the tier 9 or the tier 5 was figuring if he was talking about, because he didn't like this one much. He definitely said he didn't, and in a lot of ways it's because of these guns. It's still got 12-inch guns at tier 5, which everyone else has got 14-inch guns at this point, so you are behind in firepower, at least theoretically, except kind of yes and kind of no. You're going to struggle to overmatch people in the same way, but the fact that you have a smaller caliber is not without some advantages. Now, you've got a much more conventional 5x2 turret arrangement. It's just all centerline turrets this time, and you've still got one amidships, which sometimes might be difficult to angle out, but generally speaking, it's a fairly decent spread of firepower. Now, one of the advantages of having the smaller caliber of guns is you have a 26-second reload. And that is actually quite useful sometimes, especially if you're fighting cruisers. This, by the way, this is not particularly recommended. The armour will hold up reasonably at this kind of angle against AP shells, but I'm about to get a nasty surprise fairly soon. So, yes, 26-second reload. However, the turret turn time at 60 seconds is exactly the same as the tier 4, although everybody else at tier 5 has longer turret turn times as well. The New York and Texas both have 60 seconds, the Congo's got 54.5 rather, so it's not especially good or bad at this tier. And yes, that is a Fuso about to come around the corner, and that is me going, oh dear. Oh, very dear. But this is the moment particularly where I get lucky, because even though I'm here and not angled particularly well, he chooses to shoot at somebody else entirely. Go figure. So yeah, this was sheer blind luck. This was nothing to do with skill here at all. So, like the tier 4, the AP damage is 8400, HE is 3500. You retain the same fire chance, which went from being kind of average at tier 4 to being the worst at tier 5. 23%, Americans get 30, the Japanese get 25. The AP velocity also holds steady at 850, and at tier 4 that wasn't the fastest, but at tier 5 it is by quite a margin. The New York and Texas both have AP velocities of 792, or well, initial AP velocities. The Congo gets 775. In HE they fare a bit better. American HE is 834 and the Congo gets 805. But overall, yeah, I think this is also one of the advantages of having still the smaller shell caliber is that the velocity is rather fast, and the actual arc of the shells seems to be reasonably flat for a battleship as well, which is both an advantage and a disadvantage. You're going to struggle to like fire over obstacles, but at closer ranges it makes citadels a little bit easier, getting the kind of the rather flat, straight, high-speed shells. Your secondaries, again, very good. I would say probably the best at this tier. 4 double 105mm turrets and 14 150mm turrets. Or, well, it's still, I say turrets, it's emplacements in the hull once again. So it's a very good spread. Again, the best base range, 4.5 kilometers. I think that's the same as the tier 4, but everybody else has only got 4 kilometers. So everyone else got bumped up by half a kilometer, and you've retained that 4.5 kilometers. So it's pretty decent. AA rating. At tier 4, it was kind of like meh. It was okay for a tier 4 battleship. It wasn't anything particularly special. At tier 5, however, I think this might have, of the regular battleships, the best AA suite. However, of course, there is also the Texas, which gets a ridiculous amount of AA coverage. It's got the kind of AA that, like, high-tier cruisers, some of them can only dream of. So it's not bad though. It's got a base DPS of 112, the base rating is 38, and the best range of your AA is out to 4.5 kilometers, which is, I think, actually the best at this tier. So AFT and BFT, again, as captain skills, very, very valuable, especially on this ship. Speed, 24 knots. Which, better than either of the Americans. Of course, it can't keep up with the Congo, but still 24 feels fast enough. It doesn't feel like you're going to get left behind, especially. And it's again, it's like 3 knots difference doesn't sound like a big gap. But it's enough of a gap to make a difference to the playstyle. If this was as slow as the American battleships, I think that would make the playstyle a little bit more awkward. Turn radius, again, somewhere in between the Americans and the Japanese. It's actually up till at least tier 5 so far. They've not been that far behind the American battleships, so it's 620 versus 600. And you also have, this time, a slightly worse rudder shift than the Americans, but again, better than the Japanese, 13.2 seconds versus 12.5. And on the Congo, it's a turn radius of 770 meters with 14.9. But of course, the Congo is just a much faster ship. So it's reasonably maneuverable in the water, and it's just faster than the Americans as well. Oh, range. I didn't mention range. How did I forget that? Anyway, so range, yes, 16 kilometers base range. It's about the same as the Warspite gets. It's kind of hard to compare to the rest of the tier 5s. Because the Americans have both got a base, both the Texas and New York, they have a base range of 15.6, but they both get the plotting room modification. And of course the Congo's got 21.2 kilometers. This also does not get a spotter plane. And I think the tier 6 doesn't either. And again, this is a consequence of them basically being First World War I or prior vintage ships. Catapult planes were just not a thing in World War I. Or at least they weren't to my knowledge. Somebody's probably going to type a comment now going, well, actually, Jedi. And then, you know, I'll have to get a sound effect of somebody cocking a gun, and then Jingles will sue me for copyright infringement, possibly. Actually, no, I don't think Jingles would. I think he'd just turn up at my door with a baseball bat. He'd probably not bother with lawyers. Yeah, did I mention it's late, and, you know, the mouth goes off on its own sometimes. So, yeah, 16 kilometers is, you know, in theory not the worst at tier 5, but when you take into consideration the plotting room, which pretty much everyone uses on the American battleships from tier 5 and up, it kind of is the worst actually, but still 16's not bad, and combined with the speed, I didn't find it was that awkward. Dispersion, I also forgot to mention. I don't think it's that good. It's very hard to compare dispersion figures. There were endless discussions about the Dunkirk's dispersion, especially on the subreddit, and people were insisting, "Oh my god, it's awful, it's terrible," and not really. It was kind of average, but it's one of these things where it's kind of hard to turn to the numbers and say, "Well, here is definite evidence," because there's no one single metric that they use. So it's got 223 meters of dispersion at 16 kilometers. And then the Americans at 15.6 have 216, so it's clearly worse than the Americans. That's close enough that you can judge. And then you look at the Japanese with 237 at 21 kilometers, and you think it must be worse than the Japanese as well. And I kind of noticed it at tier 4, but tier 5 and upwards, it's the dispersion on the Japanese, not Japanese, the German battleships generally is not good. It's one of the weakest points of the entire line. It does sometimes feel like you're shooting a shotgun at somebody rather than like, I don't know, take a really extreme example with, say, the Molotov, where it feels like maybe you're firing a sniper rifle comparatively. This feels like a blunderbuss. So, yeah, that was a bit hyperbolic, but the dispersion generally is not good, and I think Tier 5 is where you'll really start to feel that that difference compared to the other battleships. You'll start to feel how much it lags behind. So there we go. I liked all of them that we've shown so far, that I've shown so far. The Congo, not the Congo, wow, the König rather. That I think is probably, some people are not going to like it just for the gun caliber. I personally found it fine, even in bottom tier battles. A lot of the time, it's kind of like the Scharnhorst. You just have to pick the right targets. The fast reload is nice, but the dispersion not so much. So there we go. That's my look at tiers 3 through 5. Next up will be tiers 6, 7 and 8, which marks the transition from the Imperial Navy ships to the Kriegsmarine ships. And it might not be coming out tomorrow as this is going out. It might actually be a day after, because Thursdays are another of my Patreon days, and I might need to go and run some errands as well, so I may not just have enough time to go and get everything done that needs to be done for one of these videos. I might just bodge something else together instead, like I've got some Dunkirk footage that I haven't shown, for instance. So hopefully you found this useful, and if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.